last approach is that you are going to have multiple versions and snapshot isolation, right? So in snapshot isolation, we can imagine that each transaction is given its own version or snapshot of the database when it begins. So it is going to read only from its private version and is isolated from the updates made by the other transaction, right? So if the transaction updates the database, then that update appears only in its own version, not in the actual database itself. So information about these updates are being saved into the real database only if the transaction commits, right? So here what we do is that we give a version, we give a user this own version of the database to a transaction, right? So you're going to give your own version of the database to a transaction. So the transaction, if it is going to perform even any update operation, it is going to update only its personal version. So it's going to update the real database only if that transaction commits, right? So these are some of the ways to implement isolation. So isolation can be implemented by means of log-based protocol, where either you can log the entire database or you are going to log a particular data item. The second approach is that you are going to have a timestamp approach. You are going to have a timestamp associated with the read data item as well as write data item, right? So whenever a transaction performs read operation on a data item capital Q, you are going to have a read timestamp, and similarly whenever it's going to perform some write operation on a data item, you are going to have a write timestamp. And this is going to be the last approach, where we are going to have multiple versions or snapshot version, where the transaction is given its own version or a snapshot when it begins. So the private version is used by a transaction when it works, and it is going to update only its own private version, not the actual database itself. So information that is being saved on the private version will be applied to the real database only if the transaction commits.